Hey, are you embarrassed about your farm's website? Then you need to listen to today's episode because I am interviewing a website designer who works with farmers specifically. And she's got some great tips to help you quickly make a few adjustments and make your website work better. No more website shame. Let's get started. Hey there, this is Corinna Bench, and welcome to the My Digital Farmer podcast. In today's market, it's not enough to just grow your product. You've got to know how to sell it too. Welcome to the My Digital Farmer podcast, where we reveal online marketing strategies and tips to help farmers like you get better and more confident at marketing. Learn how to find more customers, increase your sales, and build a strong brand for your farm. Let's start the show. Welcome to episode 246 of the My Digital Farmer podcast. I am your host, Corinna Bench, one of the farmers at Shared Legacy Farms out in Elmore, Ohio. I'm also the founder of MyDigitalFarmer.com, which is all about trying to help other farmers get more confident in their marketing and sales strategy so that you can grow a profitable business. How's everyone doing today? Welcome back to the show. Big shout out to all of my regular listeners. And if you're binging my episodes, raise your hand right now. I've recently become aware that I have a lot of binge listeners, and I love that. If you are new to this podcast, super glad you're here today. Make sure you subscribe to the show. Go check out some of my first 10 episodes. I designed them to be an onboarding ramp into the farm marketing space. So if you're kind of green when it comes to marketing, that's where you want to go. I also recommend you get onto my email list. Seriously, I know everyone says that, but I have a curated list of emails that will drop out to you over the course of 3 months. That's pretty much like a crash course in farm marketing. I'm going to share with you resources. I'm going to give you some freebies and bonuses and gifts to help you get started. And it's really going to walk you through that jungle of farm marketing. So you can grab that, get subscribed at mydigitalfarmer.com/subscribe. That's mydigitalfarmer.com/subscribe. Today's podcast is sponsored by Farm Marketing School, my new monthly online membership for farmers. Farm Marketing School is an on-demand library of marketing workshops and project plans that help farmers build some of the most important marketing elements in your farm business. Things like your lead magnet, how to audit your sales funnel, updating the homepage of your website, building out your very first email nurture sequence, learning how to write a great weekly email that drives sales, how to build and create a promotion calendar, and practicing different kinds of offers to help generate revenue. New projects and content gets added every single month. This is the DIY version of my Accelerator group coaching program. Each project is designed to be completed in just under 30 days so that you slowly build out your marketing system piece by piece. Use the step-by-step project planners for each project and the resource folders to help you jumpstart your work. Take advantage of my new marketing crash course that's inside. Watch my new email marketing foundations course, or take the onboarding assessment tool that helps you identify where your sales funnel is broken and which farm marketing school project to do first. To see what courses are currently inside of Farm Marketing School or to try out Farm Marketing School for a month, head to mydigitalfarmer.com/FMS. You can cancel your membership at any time, stay in as long as you want, or only try it out for a month. Head to mydigitalfarmer.com/FMS and enroll today. And now back to the show. Well, it's January, and this time of year, I am working on a couple of projects. Normally, I work on my promotion calendar for my farm business as well as Digital Farmer. I try to get that all arranged. And one of the things that I am adding to my docket this year is I'm trying to put all of my podcasts onto my YouTube channel for Digital Farmer. And that is quite a project, let me tell you. There are over 240 episodes now, and you do the math, and that's like 5 episodes per week, and I might get them all in 1 year's time. So I'm trying to decide how to manage that project, but I'm kind of excited about doing that big process. The other thing that I am working on is actually trying to update my farm website. Actually, Digital Farmer's website too. And this is always a several day project for me. And that's why I'm excited about today's guest, because I am interviewing a website designer, and she works specifically with farmers. I thought this was a great topic to bring back to the podcast this time of year, because if you're like me, January, February are the months when I might work on this in my farm business. You do not want to be redesigning your farm website, by the way, in the middle of July. That's a very bad idea. So this is usually a project that I put off until the winter. And so I have a really terrific guest on today. I actually heard about her from Julia Bocchese, who is doing my SEO update for my farm website. She was on the podcast a few months ago. I don't know if you recall that, but I hired her to do SEO on my farm business website, and she told me about today's guest. And so she is going to share a lot of great ideas with you for how to make your website better. One of the things I want you to listen for is there is a Google Chrome extension tip that she's going to share with you towards the end of the podcast, which is like gold. And you all need to go get that extension onto your computers because it's awesome. And it's going to help you with building out better messages for your website. So I'm going to read her bio and we're going to dive right into the episode. It's a little bit longer than normal, but I couldn't figure out what to cut because it's just so good. I hope that even if you have a website already, that you can get some good ideas from this, and maybe you can go and tweak some of the messaging or elements that are on your current homepage of your website and make it a little bit more clear. So without further ado, let me get to her bio. Today, my guest is Jean Marie Merkle, an extroverted maximalist with a passion for branding, project management, and regenerative agriculture. After working at design and advertising agencies in New York and Philadelphia for over a decade, burnout hit, and she moved to Tennessee to throw herself into farming. A car crash, the pandemic, and some cosmic alignment led to her forming her own agency, Dig Digital. Now she lives in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, collaborating with farmers and food businesses to improve their digital presence through design and marketing. Please join me in welcoming Jean Marie to the show. Well, Jean Marie, welcome to the show.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
You have an interesting backstory. When I heard about you and then I went and read your about page on your website, it talks a lot about being fueled by burnout. You have this kind of heading in your about page. Tell my audience a little bit about your backstory and how it brought you to what you now do as a creative and as a lead designer.
Yeah, for sure. And so my background is actually in project management. So my degree is in fashion marketing. So I started my career in the fashion world, which is very odd. But after a little bit of time, I kind of fell into the web design world. I applied for an internship on Craigslist way back in the day and kind of fell into that world. So I did that for over 10 years. So I was working at advertising agencies and creative agencies in Philly and New York. And that's exactly what happened is I burnt out. Like I was working 60-hour weeks, nights and weekends, like very traditional agency life. And I just was over it. And so I actually quit drinking, which is was a big catalyst for my life change, and decided that I was unhappy. And so I quit my job and left my salary and benefits and moved to a farm in Tennessee. I had become enamored with regenerative agriculture and I just wanted to switch it up. So I joined the website. I found a little homestead in Tennessee and I just picked up and moved there, which was crazy. Like the second day we were processing chickens. So it was definitely a culture shock and a culture shift from being on my phone all the time to having no service. But it was amazing. It was the best couple of weeks of my life. So I was actually stayed in Nashville for a little bit just for the year to kind of just like recalibrate. And then I got into a pretty traumatic car accident. So that brought me back to Pennsylvania. And then the pandemic hit. So it was like a lot of things one after the other. And then I actually started my own company in the pandemic because I had no other options because no one was hiring. So I figured now's the best time, I guess, to start my own thing. So I filed my LLC and I started doing work. And about a year later, I decided to pivot and niche just to working with farmers and food businesses. And so I moved to Lancaster, Pennsylvania, where I live now, which is there's a lot of Amish here. It's like farmland all over the place. It's a lot of farmland. I want to say the highest percentage of farms are in Lancaster County in Pennsylvania. And so, yeah, I moved here and the rest is history.
How do you think your prior experience, like as a fashion designer and working in New York and being surrounded by the creative world, right? Like, how does that help you and inform the work you do now, you think?
Well, I mean, I've always, even when I was doing project management as like my main career, I always had that additional layer of design thinking and aesthetics and
Mm-hmm.
all of that. So that was really what was the catalyst for me when I wanted to start my own business. I was like, I can literally do anything. And I've always loved design and I've always kind of done it on the side. And, I'm a maximalist by just myself. And I just knew that it just was what makes me happy.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wanted to just focus on the design portion. And so I just, I jumped in the puddle with both boots on.
Now, when you say that you're a website designer for farmers,
Mhm.
are you writing the copy as well, or are you getting that from farmers, or are you mostly trying to figure out like the look of it, the aesthetic, and the architecture, or do you do it
Mhm.
all?
It depends on the scope and how much the client and farmer wants. So
Okay.
sometimes I'll write the copy. A lot of times, if they have no idea, like I'm not a copywriter by trade, but I can
Hmm.
write.
Hmm.
So sometimes I'll help them along that process. Sometimes they'll have someone on their team, or they themselves want to write
Okay.
the content. And then thirdly, if we're totally lost and they want it professionally done, I'll bring in like a copywriter or someone who specializes in that to kind of help with that process.
Okay. So you've seen a fair number of farm websites in your
Yes.
day. Why don't you tell me what are the most biggest common problems that you see on these farm websites again and again when they first show up on your doorstep?
Yeah, for sure. I think to go backwards, honestly, I think the first one is that it doesn't exist. Like the biggest
Really?
issue is they don't have a website.
What?
Yeah, I
Okay.
know.
Wow. All
I
right.
know. I know. A lot of farmers, a lot of like old school farmers have a Facebook page or, something along the lines of that, but a lot of them don't have websites at all, which
Hmm.
is crazy to me. But it's part of what I do is that education piece to make them understand how important it is to have a website, even if it's simple. And then if they do have a website, a lot of times I see just outdated in terms of design or technology or content. And you can tell when you go to the site that it hasn't been looked at in years.
Hmm.
I mean, some sites I've seen literally like look like from the 90s.
Yeah.
Um, and so sometimes that can be worse than not having anything at all because it's completely out of date. And so people are looking for information or photographs or whatever it is, and they're coming to the site and it looks like it hasn't been functional
Hmm.
for 10 years. And then I think lastly, I would say the content is a big thing, which I know you just mentioned. And that's something that I focus on in my process is just making sure that the appropriate content is there, making sure it's up to date, making sure everything is relevant because if someone's coming to the site and the information is not correct, then instantly you're losing them as a potential or a current client. Or
Yeah.
yeah.
I was going to say, like, what's at stake if you don't have if you don't have a website at all, but even if you have one and it's not working,
Right.
what is at stake, would you say? I mean, I'm sure you tell this to your clients all the time.
Right. Well, I mean, it's 2024. And so the reality is that whenever someone wants to find information about someone, they're going to search for them on the internet. They're going to Google them. And
Hmm.
so people who, especially if a farm is making revenue, right? If they have a CSA, if they have people coming to their farms, if they have any events going on, all of that information needs to be up to date because very few people will go to a website, see it in disarray, and then come back to it. So that's
Hmm.
you'll lose people if they come to it, they have a bad experience, they have a bad impression. They're not going to come back in a couple months to see if you've updated it. Typically, they'll kind of just write it off and move on.
Mm. Yeah, I wonder your comment earlier about how you have a lot of farmers that are maybe older who don't even have one.
Mm-hmm.
How much of the fact that they don't have a website is just um, that they're not, maybe technology hasn't really been their native language. They're not tech
Mm-hmm.
natives, and so they just have neglected it. Is that part of the reason you think? It's not kind of like their second nature?
Definitely. I
Yeah.
think a lot of times I hear, I'll go to like agriculture conferences and just kind of be out in the community. And a lot of times what I'll hear is like, oh, I don't need a website. Like I'm old school or, I
Hmm.
do things the traditional way, which, there's a place for, I get that. But again, the reality is that if they're looking to make more money, to expand, to just be
Hmm.
present in the agriculture space, they need to have something. And that's really where I come in is that if they have no idea, great, then let me do it.
Yeah. So what information do you think people or customers are looking for when they come to a farm website? I'm sure you have to think about that as you sit down with your clients and you audit their site and you're like, okay, look, this stuff is here, this is good, but you got some big things missing because this is what
Yeah.
I know about what clients are actually hunting for.
Right.
Because to me, there's this question of like, what's good enough? Like we could make super awesome, crazy websites with all kinds of pages on them, but like bare bones, like what needs to be on there? So what do you know about what a customer is hunting for often in the early stages?
Yeah, I think that there's a few things that should be present. Again, that good enough mentality, which is totally fine if it's better than nothing. And so typically I say some sort of logo or branding. And I know that that is a can of worms because that can go from 0 to 100 and everywhere in between. But having some sort of something that represents the name of your farm or the brand that you have in general, I think is important. And an about section or an about page, I think is also super important because people want to know their farmer if they're starting relationships with them, if they're purchasing from them. You know, we want them to understand the history, your values, your mission, all of that background that will help them feel like they're getting to know them as people. I think that images, and I'll talk about this until the day I die, but imagery is so important. And I think that images of the farm, images of your products, just making sure that those are accurate and up to date. The reality is that you can have photo shoots, you can have professional photographers, but most people have a phone in their pocket, and even using that to take photographs of what you're selling is all beneficial to people who are coming to your website. And then along those lines, also your product offerings, right? Like what are you selling if you're selling anything? Those are important things that people want to know, all that information when they come to the site. And then lastly, I think contact information, of course. So
Yeah.
whether it's social media, email, phone number, the physical address, if you have CSA pickups or you have events at your farm and you need people to show up, putting the physical address is very important. And I've had on the other side of that spectrum, I've had people be like, I don't want to put my address because I don't want people showing up at my farm because it's a working farm and it's
Mm.
not like a visiting farm. So I think that all of that is important just for the bare minimum. And then if you do sell products, of course, you want to know what's available, what's in season, what it costs. where to get it. So if you have an online store, or if you're picking up at the farm, if you have a farmer's market that you're going to, just information for people to know how to purchase and then get all of your products. And then I think lastly is if there's any farming practices, so if you're organic or regenerative or something that you want to highlight, I think that's also important. If it's a core tenet of your farm and what you're actually producing, I think that's also important to represent somewhere on the site.
I love that. Can we talk a little bit about the call to action? Like, do you ever find that when you're auditing the site at first to just figure out how can I make it better, that you can't tell what you're supposed to click on? Does that ever happen to you?
It does for sure. And I think it's a combination of either unclear calls to action or CTAs, as we say in the biz,
Mhm.
or that they just don't exist. So again, those
Yeah.
calls to, like that's the important thing, that they are there. And so, you can communicate as much as you want to a website visitor, but if you're not prompting them to take a specific action,
Yeah.
you may lose them as a potential or a current customer. You need to be able to guide them to make choices and decisions and make it as easy as possible for them.
Yes, I totally agree. And I think sometimes the farmer doesn't always know what they want the call to action to be. And I feel like I'm raising my hand here right now in this season of my farm business. I'm struggling with that too because we have now created kind of two primary tracks or ways to support our farm. One
Mm-hmm.
of them is in the off, what I would call the off season right now is when we're really pitching the join our CSA because we do still have some spots. But we don't have our online store pre-order process. Like that isn't available because our farm's closed right now. We're not growing anything. We're not
Right.
selling anything until May. And
Mm-hmm.
then in May, like it switches, and then we're like, oh, our online store is kind of our main way of driving revenue. The CSA is usually sold out by then. Maybe you can get like a 4-week trial membership. But what I'm running into is what do I put? Like I have these two ways that I want to make sure people know how they can support me.
Mm-hmm.
But when they come to the website, like I'm not exactly sure what to tell them to do this time of year because
Right. Mm-hmm.
the easy point of entry into my business is to just buy from my store because that's a
Mm-hmm.
much lower price point. The CSA is like $590, right? That's a hard
Sure.
sell and I'll lose them. And so it's like, well, I want to tell them to buy the CSA, but I know that that's a hard ask. It's just an interesting, like I think sometimes farmers just don't know what they want people to do and they're confused and then they're just like, well, I'm just gonna I don't know what I don't know what I'm gonna put on my website. I'm gonna
Yeah,
make it very
exactly.
like open-ended or I'm gonna put so many options on here that it's not, very laser focused for the
Right.
customer. It's something to think about. I don't know if you run into that.
I do for sure. And I think for calls to action in general, like my rule of thumb is to keep it short and sweet. So something I've also seen is, buttons that are like, click here to join our CSI, whatever it
Yeah,
is
with
just
8 million words. Yeah.
exactly, exactly. Keeping it direct. I mean, things like shop now, browse products, join our CSA if that's applicable, sign up, right? Like I'm a
Mhm.
huge proponent of email lists and newsletters and, owning those contacts of yours. Follow us if you want to drive people to social media. So that is something that I do see a lot of the seasonality of sites and when something is wants to be focused on in different seasons. So, I mean, really, that can be approached in a multitude of ways, and that's
Mhm.
part of kind of my process when we're digging into the main goals of the site and the main target markets of the site. And the reality is that sometimes you just have to plan to do a website update when the
Yeah.
season changes for you, so you're focusing on the right things at the right time.
Yeah. Okay, well that makes me feel better. It makes me feel like I need to
Yeah,
just go and like commit to the CSA right now and not try to do everything on one page.
right, exactly. Or focus on the CSA, but have that other,
Yeah, it's
like that
there, but it's
sub.
not the
It's
main
there.
thing. Yeah, yeah,
Exactly,
yeah.
exactly.
Let's talk a little bit about how does the research of the customer inform
Mhm.
what you put on the website?
It does quite a bit, and so I think that's a combination of the research that the farmer themselves do and how they
Hmm.
know their own customer, and then communicating that to me when I'm doing
Yeah.
the website process, but then also kind of my own research that takes place as part of the process as well. So my biggest thing is a lot of times farmers can get direct information from their customers just by speaking to them. I mean, it sounds so
Yeah.
simple, but talking to them is super important. So whether it's literally one-on-one where you have someone coming week after week to the market or to the farm to pick things up, asking them questions, getting feedback from them. And we send out surveys, we schedule interviews, and getting feedback from the people who are actually on the website and who need to use the website to just understand what it is that they want and what it is that they need. And that will help dictate how we create the site and how they can navigate through the site. So, I mean, I learned from you that, you can't go after every single customer. That's just like not reality. You have your primary customer, your ideal, avatar that you want to go after, and that's who really you should be making the majority of your decisions around. And so those interviews, those surveys, whatever it is that you're gaining that information, it just helps you with how you arrange the hierarchy on your site, what products you feature, maybe potential additions. Like I had a client once who talked to a bunch of their customers, and the biggest thing that people said is that they loved the highlighting of local community events. And so we wound up putting an event calendar on the site. So there are
Mhm.
things and information that you can gather from your existing and potential customers that will help dictate what you should have on the site to then reach more people like your ideal customer.
Right, right. Plus, I think you also learn the things that their buzzwords, that the values, the reasons why they chose your business in the first place, and then I better mention that stuff on my
Right.
homepage somewhere, right? Like I'm going to
Exactly.
have a section that talks about growing practices if that's what seems to be a big driver, or like, oh, I just want to support my local farmer. Well, I better use the word support your local farmer somewhere on this
Yeah.
homepage so
Mm-hmm.
that it triggers that, need for the client when they're scanning. And you don't know that unless you talk to them,
Right.
unless you actually get on the phone or have a conversation with some of these people. So I love that. Is
Mm-hmm.
that a part of the process that you ask your clients to consider doing that before you start working with them, or do you interview them a little bit and say, what do you know about your avatars?
Yeah, typically in the beginning of my process, I'll kind of basically get as much information as possible
Hmm.
from them. But realistically, the majority of the people that come to me are at the very beginning of this phase. So a lot of them don't even know that that's something that they need to do.
Mm,
So sometimes, depending on how much time or money they have and how big the scope
yeah.
is, I'll do that as part of my process where I'll conduct interviews. I'll get names from them and schedule all of that, and that will then be what ends up being what I suggest for people going through the discovery process and actually going onto the website. So it really just depends on how intense the process is.
Hey everyone, it's Corinna interrupting the podcast for just a second to make you aware of a resource that I think would be helpful for many of you who are listening, especially to this episode about website design. It's called My Top 10 Website Mistakes That Farmers Make. I've audited a lot of farm websites over the years for farmers, and I kept seeing the same issues over and over again. And so I decided to put together the most common website mistakes that I was seeing into a multi-page guide. So if you want to know what they are, maybe you're in the process of updating your website or you want to hire someone to do that for you, you can use this PDF as a checklist to audit your own farm's website, maybe make some quick adjustments that could be stopping your website from converting. You can grab this PDF guide at mydigitalfarmer.com/website mistakes, all one word, mydigitalfarmer.com/website mistakes. It's really good. And now back to the show. Okay, so I thought it would be fun to uh, address this question of what are the three most important elements that you must have on a website homepage specifically. And I asked you to kind of come prepared to talk
Mhm.
that out with me because I think this could be almost like a checklist for some of the people who are listening today to audit their own site right now and ask themselves, do I have these pieces in place? So I'm kind of curious what made the cut on this list. I'm going to
Oh my
write
goodness.
them down because I teach some of this stuff and I'm like, oh gosh, is this going to be the same stuff that I would put on my own list? So go ahead, wherever you want to start. What's kind of that number one thing that you want to bring up?
Yeah, it's funny because it was very difficult to cut
I
these
know
down.
it's hard,
And
right? It's like,
I
no,
was like,
5,
three?
10.
Yeah, 20. Right. Exactly. Exactly. But I mean, honestly, now that I'm rethinking of it, we have actually touched on some of these already in this
Yeah.
conversation, which is nice. But again, I will, until I'm in the grave, we'll talk about high quality imagery and product descriptions. Like for me, that is so important. And, again, looping to what I mentioned before of having a phone in your pocket that is able to take images, I think it's so important that farms are focusing on that visual content. And so for me, I make suggestions typically of like, you have your phone in your pocket the most of the time. Snap some photos every day. Take a couple photos. You want to see different times of day, different seasons. If it's a functioning farm, there are different things happening all the time. So my suggestion is always to just keep a library, really, of all of these images, videos, things that you can then use on your website and also on your social media, in your email marketing,
Right.
in your print collateral, like whatever it is, you can create your own library of images. And yes, photo shoots are lovely. Professional photographers, all of that is amazing. But if that's not something that's in your budget or your timeline, taking photos yourself is better than doing nothing. And so again, at this point, iPhones, the resolution on them, you can take beautiful photographs on your phone and have them instantly at your disposal to use. So I will constantly talk to people about what their assets are. Because I have people come to me and we start a project and they have no pictures of their farm.
Mm-hmm.
And so I can only work with what I can work with.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of the day, using stock imagery is not ideal. It can
Yeah.
help, it can support for things that are more general. But when you get down to the history of your farm, what you're selling, all of that, that needs to be very specific to your farm and your offerings.
Because the picture is a form of copywriting. I mean, it is persuasion. If you see
Exactly.
a visual, what is that phrase that a picture speaks 1,000 words?
Yep.
It can supplement the words that you're putting on the page and communicate something very quickly
Mm-hmm.
to your reader and create an emotional response too. I didn't ask you to prepare this, so I'm going to put you on the spot. But what if you had to give like a short list of maybe some categories of types of
Mm.
photos that would be helpful to be on a typical website? I mean, I can think of one right now to get us started, like a photo of the actual farm family or the farmer at
Mm-hmm.
work is, I think, a good one to have somewhere
Yes.
because people
Agreed. Definitely.
are looking to see what do you look like? Are you actually real?
Right.
And are you
Which
dressed
is
like a
true.
farmer or are you wearing like a suit at someone's wedding? Like that would look weird on a farm site, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
So a picture of the farmers either at work or on a tractor or
Mm-hmm. Yes.
working with
Carhartt,
animals.
Carhartt bibs
Carhartts.
only.
Exactly.
um,
Sometimes my husband's like, you should probably put your bibs on. Even though I'm not really like out doing a lot of that, like I'm more the marketing girl, but I'm like, oh yeah, I have to sort of look the part sometimes, you know? And it's like, I'll
mm-hmm.
go get some jeans on at least, right?
Yeah. No, but
Yeah.
that's true. I mean, if there's the about section, right, where you're talking about your farm, you're talking about your missions, your values, photographs, I love. And I love a combination. So I've worked with people who, they have their young kids or daughters or their families in photos as well. Like I am a big fan of that because
Hmm.
again, it engages this like visceral reaction of this like family friendly, everyone's
Yeah.
working together. And I think that can be very impactful.
Well, and
Photo.
I think that's what people want when they go to sign up for a farm. You know, they're in their mind, they're saying, "Oh, I want your vegetables or I want your meat," but really, like deep down, they also want to know that they're supporting a family farm. and a
Exactly.
farmer specifically. Like they want that feeling of like, oh, I like this family. And so that photograph is like meeting that need for them,
Mhm.
helping them decide,
Yeah,
okay, this might be the one. I'm going to check them out. Okay, I interrupted. Keep going. What, you
absolutely.
have any
No,
other
no, no.
ideas
Yeah.
for like photo type styles? I mean, obviously the product itself, but like,
The
is there anything
products,
else?
of course, the products, and also the farm itself. So
Hmm.
a lot of things I find very successful. Traditionally, I'm thinking about the hero, that big image on your homepage, that first
Yeah,
thing that you're seeing.
yeah.
I mean, if you can do an aerial shot, some kind of image of the farm itself. And I think that that's another category of just even just like working when you're doing things, when you're picking those vegetables, when they're dirty and you're washing them, or you're moving those chicken tractors, whatever it is that you're doing. I think all of that builds into that know thy farmer. It's more information that people can gather about you and they feel good about supporting you, right? They're not walking into a supermarket and picking this up. They're buying directly from a hopeful, local farmer that's going to help support them and support their business.
Hmm. I always tell two people to try and find a picture of a customer using the
Mm-hmm.
product, or like the finished product on the plate, so that a person, is looking at that website and they're imagining themselves like they're like almost holding a mirror up and it flips and they're like, oh, that could be me with my
Yeah.
kid opening that box right now with the veggies coming out and look how she's smiling. And it's like the ideal world captured on film. Yeah, I've seen some really great CSA websites that do that well, in my
Yeah,
opinion.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and that's a good point too. Is like recipes. So I think
Hmm.
one of the things with CSAs traditionally is, for someone like me, it excites me to get something in my box that I have no idea what it is, but it scares some people, right? So
Hmm.
being able to say, "Hey, yes, you can use this kohlrabi." That's always the example that people use, but
Yeah.
it's so
Yeah.
true. If you don't know what to do with it, and you go on the website, and yeah, there's a picture of it, but there's also a picture of something that could be made with it. I think again that helps people feel like it's something attainable that they can do and something that they can make with the items in that CSA box.
Yeah, awesome. So you said high quality imagery
Mm-hmm.
is one of the top things that you recommend paying attention to. Before you go to the second one, I just want to ask, like technically, do people need to watch out for the size of the picture, like
Mm-hmm.
slowing down the website? Because I know that's something that Julia, who's doing my SEO audit, has said to me. She's like, your pictures are way too big. You got to like shrink them. It's making your site slow. So
Yes.
what does that look like?
So yeah, so there's a gray area with that because you don't want your images to be too small because
Hmm.
they'll show up pixelated and blurry and they won't look great. But yes, the higher you go resolution wise, the crisper it's going to look. But yes, also the larger the file. And so when it comes to SEO, and Julia and I have talked about this a bunch of times, is one of the elements of that is making sure that your site is quick to load and it's not being slowed down by a bunch of images, videos that are too high quality. So there's like that in between ground where it's still crisp and still a high resolution, but it's not like too big.
Hmm.
And yeah, so there definitely is that to watch out for. I don't know numbers off the top of my head, although I can follow up with that. But
Yeah.
of those suggestions, but in general, just making sure that it looks good, but it's not too big.
Yeah, yeah. Well, most people are looking at websites on their phones. Isn't that true?
Yes, very
So
true,
now
very true.
nowadays anyway. So that kind of makes me feel a little bit better as far as is worrying about pixelation size. Like,
Yeah.
but yeah. Okay, what's your second thing on your list?
My second thing is contact information. So I know we talked about this again, but how do people reach you? Whether it's a contact form, a direct email that they can email you, or social media, whatever it is that you communicate with your customer, they need to be able to communicate with you. And that's of course including the address of your farm, like I said before, if it's something that they need to come there to pick something up, or if you're having events, it's just very important because I've seen websites that have no, I'm like, I don't know what state you're in, I
Yeah,
don't know where you are, and how
yeah,
do I get a hold of you. And so by combining all of those things onto the website, and I do it in a multitude of different ways. In the footer, sometimes like I'll always have social media icons and the email or newsletter sign up, whatever that is. And we'll typically have a contact page where it's like, hey, this is how you can get a hold of us. And it can be a form that can be filled out by customers so farmers can get back at their leisure. Sometimes I've gotten the feedback from farmers that they're like, I don't want to give them my email because I don't want them to email me every 5 minutes, which is
Mhm.
fair. So it's really however you want them to communicate with you is, again, leading back to that direct relationship that you're having with this farmer. You need to be able to contact them. If you have an issue, if there's troubleshooting that needs to happen, all of that needs to be funneled into some sort of contact information.
Yeah, or even just where can I find you? If you
Right.
if you don't have a place on your farm to sell and you don't want them to know where you are, your mailing address, that's cool. But like,
Yeah.
are you at a farmer's market? Like, where can I go and buy your stuff then, right? Where do I
Yep.
find your product? Um, sometimes those very obvious things don't seem so obvious when you're designing your website and now a person can't find you and can't buy from you. And you just put
Right.
a hurdle up, right? You made a big barrier that they
Mm-hmm.
just their brain shuts down and says, I'm not going to work hard to try and figure out where they are. I'm just going to go to the
Legitimately.
next,
Yeah.
yeah, go to the next farm on Google.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's it.
Yeah.
Like, it seems so fragile, but very quickly you can lose a potential customer if you're not
Mhm.
giving them information that they need in a direct way.
Yeah, I don't know if you ever listened to my podcast, but there was an episode I did a few months ago about when I tried to book a massage appointment, and I went to the website looking, to find their directions, and it was in Oak
Mm-hmm.
Harbor, and it ended up being Oak Harbor, Washington, instead of Oak Harbor,
Yeah.
Ohio, which is like 20 minutes away from me. And I went back later and looked on their website. I'm like, it does not say that anywhere, And it was a great example. I should have like known when I saw the weird area code, I guess. But I don't
Right.
know, like, and I study this stuff, so this should have tripped me up. But it was just an interesting example of like, here's a business that didn't have that key information, didn't say I'm in Metro
What
Toledo,
state are you
Ohio.
in? Yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
exactly.
or city even. Like, what region are you in, so that a person
Yeah.
can decide. Especially nowadays with like Instagram, I think sometimes we're posting stuff. People can follow us and get tagged or like, oh, that's a great farm I want to follow. And then in that top of funnel stuff, even on Instagram, we're not specifically saying over and over again, we're in Metro Toledo. So that if you happen to be following me in Colorado, you're
Right.
not going to get on my email list then, because you won't be able to buy my stuff. So
Right.
yeah, it's making sure that we have that near the top somewhere when people start to research us. They don't end up accidentally getting on our list and falling into our rabbit trail and then figuring out later, oh, I can't even buy from them. So
Right. Right.
super
Yeah. I
important.
mean, that is one of my biggest pet peeves too, is when people don't put their location on Instagram. That is one thing for me because, I follow every single farm that comes across my purview, no matter where they
Yeah.
are in the world, because I'm just obsessed with it. But that is true, where I literally will be like, I have no idea where you are. I have to
Mhm.
start looking through the photos and see, oh, is it snowing? Is it, I
Yeah.
have no clue. Because a lot of farms that come up are in Australia, and I'm always like, "This looks so cool, I want to go here." And I'm like, "Okay, well, I better book a flight."
And not to mention too, there's SEO potential and implications with putting your location
Right.
on the homepage of your website, as definitely in the footer, but like even higher up, like it should be near the top so that
Mm-hmm.
those Google crawlers like see that helps them know, to recommend you or not recommend you when someone's searching. So yeah.
Exactly. And along those lines, your Google business profile as well, if
Yes.
you have that, and you should have that, if you have a physical address that people are going to, that should be on there as well, because that will all show up for people who are searching things, especially if they're local. You want
Right.
them to know that they can come to you.
Right. Right. Yeah, and for those of you who are listening, if you haven't heard the episode on SEO, I interviewed Julia Bocchese, who you actually know.
Mm-hmm.
And that was just a few episodes back. I feel like it was maybe 2 months ago. So you guys can go look that up. But the website design and SEO kind of work together very carefully. So make sure you
Mm-hmm.
kind of study that at the same time. Okay, let's move on. Are you done with point number two? Was there anything else you wanted to say there?
Nope, that's it.
Okay, that's good. So let's go to the third element that you think needs to be on there on the short list of things to be on the homepage.
Yeah, I feel like this is so anticlimactic because we've talked about this, but it is very important, is those call to actions and having
Mm,
prominent call to actions throughout the site. So we want to drive visitors to take action on whatever it is that you need that to be. So like I mentioned before, shop now, browse products, join our CSA, whatever it is that's most applicable, we want it to be direct. And I say we want it to be often, but not overkill. So there are sites I've seen where it's like every section has the same button over and over. I think that there is a fine line with the overkill there, but it is important to have the same call to action on a page in multiple spots. So if someone is scrolling through and they don't get all the way to the bottom to hit that button, then there's one that's closer to the top that they can hit if they start reading and they're like, oh yeah, I'm in. Like I'm in. I don't need to read the rest of this. So there is placement is also important without being overkill.
Yeah. Have you noticed, or do you recommend that the call to action buttons are a different color? Like, do you have any comments on color palette so that they stand out or?
Yes. So typically when I build, I pretty much exclusively work in Squarespace. I find it's just the simplest, affordable for farmers, and very easy for them to update. And I can make it completely custom. So typically when I work in Squarespace, there's a color palette that you can define. And so as part of my design process, when I'm figuring out what that color palette is for that farm, typically I'll take the accent color or the bright color and use that as the call to action. So the one thing that I do suggest always is having that be consistent. So all of the buttons are the same color so that people get to understand that, oh, this is asking me to take action. So for instance, I just did a site and their colors were all different blues, but they had orange as like this accent color. So for me, I made the buttons orange because it was drawing people's eye to take an action and bringing them to understand that they have to click on that button without being too overbearing.
Got it. Can you give me a few examples of language, like types of calls to action that you typically see on homepage websites? Like what are the options that people might have to choose from besides buy now or shop now?
Shop now, browse products. So if it's something that you have a bunch of different offerings, or things are seasonal, things are shifting often, you could have the browse to kind of give them that additional layer of information that they can see everything in one place. Again, the sign up I think is super important. I am a huge proponent of getting as many emails as you can because it's very important because you own that email list. You own your website, you own that email list. Any kind of third parties, if Mark Zuckerberg decided tomorrow that farms were not allowed on Facebook or Instagram, a lot of things will be lost. So I always suggest highlighting the signing up. And I know you're a big proponent of that as well. And so just making sure that you're gathering as much information as possible and letting them know that, hey, this is how you can learn more from us or keep in touch with us and just kind of know what's going on. Learn about us or an about us. Typically when I do a homepage, I include like a little blurb about the farm. But if we want to get deeper and kind of learn again more about what the offerings are, different farming practices, etc., there can be a direct button to go lead them to the about page. So the homepage specifically really to me is a little bit of every one of the inside pages. It's like a little taste of everything that the website has to offer with calls to action to dig deeper into each of those sections.
I love that. And I feel like I want to ask a follow-up question here because you and I know that top three things on your website, like that is not enough. Like there are other pieces that really need to be there. So I'm just kind of wondering if you can give us a teaser, like what when you were, cutting the list to three, like what were the ones that landed on the editing room floor where you're like, oh, this really needs to be in there too. If you give us a couple more that just were hard for you to let go.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like products specifically. So if someone's selling individual products, I think it's important to pull those onto the homepage if that's something that's happening. So, I've also worked with some Shopify sites as well. And so that's a good example for like, if, people are heavy on the e-commerce or they're selling individual items, I think bringing that to the front is also super important. And honestly, and this is not really specifically for the homepage, but for the site in general, is taking a look at your navigation and how complicated it is, because it really
Mm.
should be as simple as possible. So the idea is to get someone to where they're going in as few clicks and as few time as possible. So by taking a look at the way that your navigation is structured, it's a good opportunity to kind of cut down and condense
Mm.
and combine so that it's not overwhelming for the user when they're seeing all of these different options in a navigation.
Yeah,
So
I
I think,
love that. What are I feel like I've seen some very common kind of formulas for
mhm,
navigation. Like there's always one that's about, you see the
yeah.
about, you see our products is a common one, or
Mm-hmm.
work with me if it's more like a service provider. What are some other common top like navigation buttons that you see?
Yeah, so typically you're exactly right. You know, the home button, which is traditionally the logo, is kind
Yeah,
of bringing you back to home. The about, and the about can even be like a folder that has a drop down that has,
yeah,
about the farm, about our growing practices, whatever it is that you want to represent. I
right.
think that making folders and having drop downs with items that are similar is very helpful for the user to navigate. Because what
Hmm.
I have seen is when websites are being updated, every time there's a new page, they kind of just like dump it in the navigation. But if there are pages that are related to each other, we can combine them and it makes it easier to navigate.
Yep.
Obviously, a contact button or a contact
Hmm.
us page is super important. For CSA farms, typically I have a big colored button in that header that says, become a member or sign up for the CSA or whatever it is that we want to drive them to do. And then really from there, it's just anything that would be specific to your farm. So I worked with a farm that did a lot of community events and donations and volunteerism and all of that. So we had a community tab. So there are some specifics that will depend on your farm in general, but really it's about shop, again, become a member, whatever it is that you want people to do the most to drive them to. I typically say put a big button in that header, get people going where they need to go right away.
Yeah. I've also seen things like blog or
Mm-hmm.
FAQs is sometimes a category, but not always. Sometimes that's a subcategory of a product.
Right.
Um, where is the place for testimonials? Because I know that you
Mm-hmm.
know they're important to have on a website somewhere, but like where do you think they're most powerful?
So typically, the way I handle testimonials is I generally have one page that has all of them on there,
Hmm.
just as like a house for them all. But I don't always link that in the menu. For instance, it may be linked from another portion of the website because what I like to do with testimonials personally is pepper them throughout the site. So
Hmm.
specifically, if they're in reference to specific parts of the farm or what they're offering, I'll put them in those places. So if there's a testimonial talking about how wonderful the family is and the farmers and all that, I may put that on the about page. If there's one, talking about the CSA, I'll put that on the CSA sign up page. So my typical suggestion is we'll have them on the homepage always, typically like a slider or something to
Hmm.
kind of get people intrigued. But my general best practice is to have them in multiple places, especially if they're relevant to the content that's on the page itself. But then I typically will create a page that's just testimonials because then that can be a one off link that can also be shared outside of the website as well, right? Like if someone's like, oh, I don't know if I want to, you're like, hey, here's a link of all the testimonials from customers that have said that they love us. So you should love us too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's talk about platforms. I didn't ask you this question on your prep sheet, but I'm sure you can. This is a common, I think, roadblock for people who don't have a website yet and need to get started. They just feel really overwhelmed. They don't even understand like the things they'll need to have in order to host a website
Right.
in the first
Yeah.
place.
Yeah.
Can you like very big picture like help a brand new farmer who's maybe not tech savvy at all, like at
Mm-hmm.
all, help them see this is what, in order to put something on the website or make a website that exists, like this is what you'll need to have. And then roughly like what it costs. So I'm
Mm,
talking about like hosting or like having a paying for the URL. Like, can you just help people see what those are and then maybe talk about common platforms that farmers use so they have a
sure.
starting point of what they could even research?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, I'm a huge Squarespace fan. I do the majority of my work in Squarespace because everything lives in Squarespace itself. So, one thing I see that people get, I don't want to say tricked because that sounds very negative, but they'll sign up for like a WordPress or something that seems to be a free option or a very inexpensive option. But what winds up happening is you need to add all of these extensions and third party
Mhm.
apps to get the things that you actually want out of the website, which makes it more complicated and more expensive. And you're depending on all of these different apps or platforms or extensions to be kept up to date, to make sure that they're not, spamming you. There's a lot to be said for managing a website in that regard, which is why I typically go with Squarespace because everything is built in. There's no separate hosting. You don't have to deal with any of that. Everything is within Squarespace itself, and so that makes it really easy for farmers without working with me or after they've worked with me. Because my big goal when I work with anyone is to hand them the keys to make sure that they're able to update it after
Yeah.
they're gone. So, in very very traditional, old school agency world, you were tied to an agency or a person forever
Yeah.
because every time you wanted an update, you had to like reach out to them and pay them, etc.
Yeah, don't
I
do that, everyone.
don't do that. Like, I just, my biggest goal is, I provide training as part of my process and walk them through how to do things. So that at the end of the day, they want to update, they want to add a new page, they want to update photos. Like that is all able to be done on their own. And Squarespace, and I would say Wix as well. Wix is another one that makes it pretty simple to do that. I think that those are very easy to use, intuitive platforms that if you are starting from scratch with no knowledge, there are templates, there are things you can't really mess it up too much. And then I use Shopify occasionally as well for people who have larger like e-commerce
Mhm.
needs. But Shopify from a design perspective is not as customizable
Yeah.
as Squarespace is.
Yeah, that can be
um,
frustrating.
yeah. And so, there are people who legitimately are like Shopify developers. Like you have to
Mhm.
write code to change some things. So
Yeah.
when I work in Squarespace, I know little like CSS tricks and things
Mhm.
that can make it look cool, but in Shopify, you're literally having to write code, which is much more difficult. So, but they also have templates that you can use. So I think any of those, again, a Shopify is good for templated stores. Squarespace, I just love. I'm a Squarespace Circle member. Like I build all my sites in Squarespace. I just love it. Wix again is another one that is relatively simple to use. I'm not a WordPress fan personally, only because of those things I mentioned before of
Mhm.
like having to manage all of that. And when you log in, it can be very overwhelming. So those would be my suggestions.
And
Pricing wise,
yeah, I was going to say, what's the price point? Just help people know ballpark. What are they paying for to
so
have a website?
for Squarespace, I believe it's like $300 a year. I want to say it's about that much for you to have a website and for it to be functional. Now there are some additions that, of course, come into play. So if you have like an e-commerce portion or you need to sell things, they have e-commerce plans that cost a little bit more. But it really just depends on the need of your actual site. But in general, it's about that much. And then they also have like Squarespace offers an email address as well. So if you have your domain connected and mine is digdigital.co, I can get hello at digdigital.co. And they offer that for a year for free. And then after that, I believe it's like $70 a year. So there are things that you can kind of add on, but at the end of the day, you can do everything in Squarespace specifically. Shopify I'm not sure what their pricing is off the top of my head. It may be comparable with Squarespace, The only thing with Shopify is if you want to select a specific template, sometimes those are paid
A little
templates.
more.
So yeah, Shopify has like I think maybe less than 10 free options, which are totally fine. I've used them multiple times, but they
Mm-hmm.
also have very specific themes that could be 200, 500, $1,000. So it really just depends on what you want to accomplish and how much you're willing to spend. But you can do it relatively affordably.
Now, if someone's listening to this and their eyes are rolling back into their head right now, like what would they do if they're like, I need to get a website up and running? Do they contact a website designer? Is that who they're looking for specifically? And they can just say, please help me, like get it started, like get it launched, and they could a person like you could take it from there and
Yeah.
walk through the whole process, help them find get open their account,
Yes. Yes.
buy their URL address, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
you would just kind of walk them through that project plan. Okay. Um,
Me personally, yes. So
yeah,
not everyone does that, but the
yeah,
way that I work with people is very hand-holdy in a good way,
right.
because I understand like a lot of times I wind up becoming through the process just like their tech person or their computer
Mm-hmm.
person, and a lot of that doesn't always have to do with website design specifically, but just because it's second nature to me, like I just know how to do everything because I just grew up like that. So I really become I've done that before where I've taken their credit cards and ordered the website because they're like, I just don't want to do it. So yes,
Mm-hmm.
that is something that me personally I would do. And it depends. So the reason why my business exists is because I am that perfect niche in between hiring a huge agency that could cost, I mean, $100,000 to do your website custom,
Mm-hmm.
or hiring someone off of Fiverr or Upwork, or someone that you don't know that
Yeah.
can maybe do what you want or maybe not. So what I offer and what other of my colleagues offer as well is that middle ground where I don't have a ton of overhead. I'm a one lady team who kind of brings in other people as necessary. But I think all of that is important to note of when you're looking for someone to build your site, is to do your due diligence and make sure you research them and see their testimonials or previous work. I think
Yeah.
that's really important
Mm-hmm.
to make sure that you can see your site in something that they've done before. So I think that just to kind of curb that stress during that process of making a short list of all of the people that maybe you want to reach out to is just making sure that they're going to build something that you actually like.
Yeah, I have a horror story from when we hired someone to redo our website long
Mm-hmm.
ago, and we paid them $3,000, and we ended up stopping the process after a few months, and I lost that money. I lost that investment, but I just didn't like
Oh,
what was happening. It was really like eye-opening. So that I would reiterate just making sure that you look at their portfolio, but also that you call some of the people they've worked with and find out
mm-hmm.
about how do they work with you? Like, what is their process? How was the communication? Was there a project plan? Were there milestones? Like, just doing some of that work
Mm-hmm.
to make sure you know what you're getting yourself into. So, like, if a farmer, let's just say, we'll talk in a second about like how you specifically help people and what your process is. But like, let's say a farmer wants to DIY fix their own
Mm-hmm.
website. Um, I'm not even going to say start one from scratch. Let's say fix one they already have. Like,
Mm-hmm.
what process would you suggest that they followed? Like, where do they even start? Is there like, I don't know, three-step plan or something that you say, hey, first do this and then do this?
Yeah. So typically, I always say just to start with like an honest audit of your site, right? So taking a look at what's working, what's not working. And, I say this with a grain of salt, but asking other people,
Yeah.
friends, family, customers, ideally, to kind of go through your site and be like, hey, this is working and this is not working. A little exercise that I like to do with people looking for this process is to get people to go to their website and say, hey, you're looking to sign up for the CSA. How do you get there? And just watch where they go and watch how they move through the site to find the things that they're looking for. So
Mm-hmm.
typically that's like the first step, is just taking a look at everything, maybe getting, again, opinions from others. Although I will say You do not have to listen to everyone. That's
Mhm.
something I always like to say because, your mom's going to think different than your boyfriend and, everyone's going to want a different color. But to understand like the functionality portion,
Yeah.
I think a content review is also very important in that as well. So we've been talking a lot about content and just making sure that it's updated. Maybe it just needs a refresh. A lot of times just rewriting or, rejiggering what you already have on the site is enough to give it a refresh. And then of course, for Google and the crawling purposes, it's good for indexing because it shows that you're updating the site and that there's
Mm.
action and it's updated. I think that simplifying your navigation is also very important. So what I was mentioning before of the least amount of clicks is ideal. So taking a look at what happens, because like I said, sometimes people create new pages and they just throw everything in the navigation, and then all of a sudden there's like 40 things up there and it doesn't really make sense. And then I think making sure it looks good on mobile. So you mentioned this before, and that is a huge thing that I always like to let people know is a lot of people look on their phones. That's where they're going to be looking at your website. So just making sure, no matter what website builder that you use, some of them have built-in, mobile optimization, which is great, but some of them need that little bit of a finesse. So just looking at it on your phone and making sure the buttons are big enough for people to click on their phone, making sure the images are not too large that someone's, scrolling for 20 minutes before they get to content. So just those little tweaks on mobile, I think is another good thing to do during that process.
I love that. One
Yeah.
of the things I would add here too is to consider, I don't know if it's in the top three, but I always like to look at other websites, maybe not even in my industry, but to pay attention to what I like about the designs of other sites in terms of flow or style or how many words, what elements they're putting in the messaging flow too. And sometimes that helps inform, oh, like I never thought about creating a testimonial section here or having the testimonial section look this way. It's
Right.
almost like you create a Pinterest board, right, of
Yeah.
ideas for what are cool things you could put on a website, and then you can go back and be like, oh, I liked this element and how they had this a lot of white space in the header image on whatever, right? You just sort of come up with a short
Yeah.
list of things that you liked, and then I often will find when I'm reworking mine like that, I kind of go to that short list of ideas that I saw from someone else. Like I get inspired by what I saw on another website, I guess is what I'm trying to
Right.
say.
Yeah.
And so
I
if
have a,
you're,
I have a, oh, I'm sorry.
no, go ahead.
I have a bookmarks folder like on my in my browser that just every time I come across a cool site, I just save it in there as inspo. And
Yeah.
it allows me to, because I'm like, yeah, same thing. I'm like, oh, that's a cool idea. And that's just for me as a designer for other ideas, but for your own site, and that's actually part of my process as well, is
Mhm.
going through that and seeing what they like and what they don't like.
Yeah, I even have a little shortcut. I don't know what it's called anymore now, but it's sitting on my I'm hovering over it right now with my mouse on the computer, but it allows me to when I click on it, it will take a screenshot of the entire page and save it as a
Mm-hmm.
PDF to my computer. And sometimes I'll do that because I like to say, I want to be able to go back and remember what did that look like? What was the outline of the page? What was the wireframe of the website? And even like what were the messaging points? Like what were the headlines that they had in the different sections? Because I don't want to say steal, but I could use those as formulas and then just change out the words. And that just gives me almost like a skeleton to work with. So
Right.
I
Yeah,
wish I
I,
could
I have a
remember
I have
what
a
that
similar, I
yeah.
have a Chrome extension called, I think it's called Go Full Page.
That's what it
And
is.
oh
Yes.
yeah,
Okay, everyone
yeah,
go find that Chrome extension,
go.
go full page. I'll put it in the show notes. It's
Yes,
free
it's great. It's
and it's
great.
great. Yep, yep.
I'll do that. Like as I'm designing, I'll do that just to kind of zoom out and take a look at the whole thing as a whole.
Hmm.
Just to make sure that, because when you're in it, right? Like you're in it and you see it, but sometimes you just have to zoom out. So that's super helpful.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's talk about the process of working with a designer like you, because there might be some people who are interested in either working with you or someone else, and they're just like, how does that work? What should a farmer
Mhm.
expect the experience to be like from the moment they reach out to you via email? Like what happens first, second, third, or what should happen?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
how long does the process typically take from the time that you talk to someone and say, I want to have a website, and then you turn the keys or you give them the keys and say, here you go, it's live.
Yeah. So yeah, I can speak to my specific process
Yes.
and how I kind of do things because I know everyone differs a little bit. But the way that I work with a client is they reach out to me. So whether it's a referral or through my website, the first thing I do always is I schedule a call. Like that's the first thing I want to do is talk to them directly. If they're interested in working with me or getting a website, I want to talk to them to hear what they want, what their goals are, what their pain points are. Like that's a big thing for me of like, hey, why are you trying to update this site? Or, why is it that you're reaching out? So I think that that's really important. And then also I get to start that relationship building. So usually, I like to do a video if I can, especially because, the way that everything is I work with farms all over the country, all over the world. I've done, so I don't always get to meet them, but I like to virtually meet them at least so that I kind of understand what they're looking to do. So once we do that, we kind of talk through the details. I put together a proposal for them. And so that includes a breakdown of my process, any of my like overarching suggestions on what they're looking to do. It includes a timeline, it includes the cost. I also have a page in there that has emails and phone numbers of my previous clients to use as references so that they can reach out to them if they want to. I kind of just like to put all of that in one place. And then I will send that over and then have a follow up call if needed. Hopefully they say yes. And then from there, I'll put together a contract. Very simple. My contracts are like a single page, just kind of outlining the necessities. I do an initial invoice to kind of get the ball rolling and to set my schedule aside. And then we get started. So the like sales process, I like to keep as efficient as possible just to kind of get the ball rolling. But then once the project starts, I have a kickoff call. So it kind of resonates with the initial call, but we get a little bit deeper now that they've said, yes, we're starting the process. I want to know about what they think makes a good site, a bad site, all of that. I talk through, the admin elements. So again, luckily, I have a project management background. So when you work with me, I'm a designing and I'm also project managing. So it's a whole other podcast episode about project management, but I have that built into my process because that is what I did for so long. So that kind of resonates with what you were talking about before about milestones, project plans, all of that organization and admin is like the project manager side of my brain. So all of that gets discussed and figured out in the kickoff. And then from there, the first thing I do is a discovery. So that first interaction I'm having is basically gathering as much information as possible. So I'm getting their branding, I'm getting any work they've done previously, I'm getting access to their site if it's an update. I'm basically just getting as much information as I can up front because at the end of that process, I create the sitemap. And so the sitemap, which is basically the navigation and the blueprint for your site, is what's going to dictate what pages are being built and how they're being nested into each other. So that is the end of that initial process. So I present the sitemap and I do what I call a design gut check. So that's what we were talking about before, where I will pull 5, 7 websites, farm websites, but also completely out of the industry. And I present them to the client and get their visceral gut reaction of like what they like and what they hate. So usually I'll throw in like a crazy weird one just to kind of get an opinion from them. Most of the time they're like, I hate that. But every once in a while they're like, yeah, let's go funky with it. So from a design perspective, there's so many different paths it can take. So I like to get to understand what they like and what they don't like. So from there, I will design typically the homepage or a single page to establish the creative direction, just to make sure that we're all aligned on what it's going to look like. Once that's approved, I build out the rest of the pages, and then I go ahead into Squarespace or whatever platform, and I build all the pages. So at that time, hopefully, we're working on content, we're making sure that everything is updated, we're gathering images, all of that. So I can put everything into the site. And then once it's all done, once it's approved, I test it, the client tests it, just make sure all the links work, make sure everything works, and then we launch it. And then from there, I have a 2 week post launch support period where I'm like on it in case anything were to go wrong for those 2 weeks, just to make sure everything is working as intended. If I add like Google Analytics or something, just making sure it's gathering data, just making sure that everything is like doing what it's supposed to be doing. Yeah, and then they're famous.
Yeah, and where does the onboarding, like the training element come in? Is that towards the end as well?
Yeah, that's toward the end. So typically I do it after the launch just because we're kind of focused on getting
Yeah.
everything launched and live. And so once that happens, I do a combination. I typically do like a live training with them where I'll show them how to do key things on the website. And then I use Loom,
Hmm.
the video recording, and I'll do like kind of the top 5 things that they're probably going to need to do. I'll record myself doing that and talking through it and then send it to them. So they just have that as something that if they need help in the future. But I mean,
Yeah,
they could always
that's
email me. Yeah.
right. That's super smart. How much time does it typically take for,
Mm.
a small farm? Like I'm not talking about a huge business that's got a ton of pages. Like, is this a 3 month process, 6 weeks?
Yeah. My general time frame for a simple, like nothing, not too many bells and whistles, I say is about 6 to 8 weeks. That's kind of my general gauge.
Okay.
But
And
it differs.
I would imagine there's probably an ideal time for the farmer to work on this project with you. Um,
Now.
yeah, now. So all of you who are listening, if you're thinking about it, don't make this decision in July.
Right,
It'll
exactly.
create a lot of chaos, but that is a good time to take pictures, I guess, maybe to go and start
Yes,
researching.
content all the time. But that's really, I mean, the way that my seasonality works is right. Like the winter is when things are typically slow. There's planning going on,
Hmm.
especially in January. You're looking at budgets, you're kind of figuring everything out. And so
Yeah,
typically in October, I like to be like, hey, it's
right.
time. Because I will have people reach out to me in March and be like, hey, I need this done by today, which is not ideal.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I usually like to think ahead to prepare for when for when that is. But it's always dependent. Like right now I'm working on with a farmer who just got a VAP-G grant. So like we had to wait
Mm-hmm.
until they got the grant money, and I like helped them write the grant, like I helped them with that whole process. So a lot of times it kind of depends on the seasonality, but in general, winter's the best time.
What kind of information does a farmer need to have ready to be able to support you and ensure
Mm-hmm.
that what you create actually works and leads to new clients for them? Like, is there in this process of designing?
Yeah, I think, coming to the process and coming to me in the kickoff with as much information as possible is obviously the most helpful. So that is, again, updated content, like making sure that everything that's going to go on the site, like that you've at least thought about it. So it's not a requirement. I don't say like, hey, day one, I need everything in place, but it just makes the process so much easier if that has already started to be thought. Photos gathered, content written, thinking through, hey, I may want to put some new pages on here. Like all of that thought work is super helpful. If there's any pre work that was done, like competitive analysis or research, or, again, any other sites that they like all of that information is very helpful for me because
Hmm.
during that discovery process, I'm really just digging in to get to know their farm and their brand as much as possible before I start. So a lot of the people that I work with are at a starting point where they really are coming to me with a blank slate, which is totally fine. And we do that process together. But realistically, it's anything that can help us get ahead of the game is super important.
Yeah.
Existing marketing materials, any of that. If there's Google Analytics on the site that exists, just so I can look at everything that's there. So that's basically the most things that I request, and then just presence. For me, it's when we kick this off and we start the process. And I know we talked about this earlier, but depending on seasonality, is you have to be available. You have to. It's a collaborative process, right? I'm going to
Hmm.
ask questions. I'm going to need feedback. I'm going to need things, and so with that project management in mind, I create timelines. I have feedback deadlines and all of that. So I always just ask that they're in it once we start because I'm in it. And so, if we can collaborate together, then it just makes it a very efficient process.
Well, this has been so great. Please tell my audience where they can go to learn more about you or see some of your work in your portfolio.
Yeah. So my website is dig-digital.co. Not .com, it's .co. I could not get the .com. My Instagram has some of my previous work and a lot of just like my life on it. It's just like fun for me. So that's dig__digital. And then honestly, you can always just send me an email. So my email is hello@digdigital.co. I'm always happy to meet. Every time someone reaches out to me or on LinkedIn, they'll reach out if we're in a similar industry. And I say, yeah, let's just like have a meet, like let's talk to each other. And I find that that's just always helpful. So I'm always down to give advice or, whatever needs to happen, just shoot me an email.
Well, this has been a fun meetup, you and me. I'm so glad that we met, and I love your energy. I wish people could see the video of you because you're just like exuding energy. Just,
I know.
It's very, very, so much charisma. So, and leadership. So thank you for sharing your wisdom on this space, on this platform. And I will make sure that I put your link in the show notes for our listeners. Thank you so much for
awesome. Thank you,
today.
Corinna. This was amazing. I love it. Thank you.
Oh my gosh, that was so good. Thank you so much, Jean Marie, for showing up and sharing the love on farm websites, making that topic feel a little more accessible to all of us. If you want to go and work with her or learn more about her, you can head to the show notes. Those can be found at mydigitalfarmer.com/246. If you like today's episode, please share it with a friend. So go grab the URL, copy the link for this episode, and text it to one of your farmer friends or someone that you think needs to hear about it. And that way we let more people know about this amazing resource, the podcast that is basically like a free education in farm marketing. So help me make more farmers aware of it. If you want to get onto my email list, remember I have some free stuff to send your way to make your marketing even stronger. You can grab that at mydigitalfarmer.com/subscribe. And don't forget, I'm now on Instagram at mydigitalfarmer. I'm going to be showing up there a lot more regularly with a marketing tip or mindset coaching moment to help you get better at your farm marketing and your business. So I'd love to connect with you there at mydigitalfarmer. Also looking for podcast guests. So if you have a really cool result, like maybe you've tried something that you've learned about on this podcast and you had some really good results and you want to share your story, reach out to me. Or if you know another farmer that you think has something to share to make everyone's lives better through this podcast, please let me know. Just send an email to mydigitalfarmers@gmail.com. We can see if it's a match and they may end up on the show. That would be terrific. Thanks so much for joining me today. Have an amazing week, everyone. I believe in you. I believe in you. You are powerful. All right? You are powerful. Lean into that. And I'll catch you next week. Bye-bye.